Shana Tova. Old Jewish joke number 5,785. Weeks before the high holidays, the rabbi meets with the synagogue president. "What will you be talking about this year?" asks the president. "With all the news in the air in the midst of a consequential election, I thought I would talk about world affairs and how Jewish values underpin our democracy." No politics from the pulpit. You can't do that," exclaims the president. "Well, maybe I'll talk about living a life of mitzvot, the importance of actively doing Jewish." "You know, Rabbi, not everyone's religious like you. You'll exclude too many people." "How about the classic beauty of Shabbat?" "Most of us work and shop on Saturdays. You'll offend people." "The flow of the Jewish holidays?" "Ditto." "The beauty to be found in observing kashrut?" "Big ditto." "You know, Rabbi, many of the non-kosher restaurants in town are owned by our members." It's true. "Perhaps Jewish ethics, the importance of tzedakah, of caring for the poor and the downtrodden." "Rabbi, not everyone is in a position to give. You don't want to embarrass our members." "Okay, so what do you want me to talk about?" says the exasperated rabbi. "How do I know? You're a rabbi. Just, talk about Judaism." And that was a very long way of saying something revelatory to you this morning. I have no idea what I want to say this year. That's not entirely true. Actually, each year I try to ask, what do people need to hear this year? What do I need to hear? What will lift our hearts on this first day of 5785? This is a hard year to stand in front of the congregation. Think about all that has happened since last Rosh HaShanah, and your thoughts need not go immediately to global affairs, to war and terror, nor focus on the strife and struggle of this moment in our nation. Start closer to home. Start inside. First, the positive. Since last we gathered here, some very great blessings have occurred. Couples have stood under the wedding canopy. Babies were born, perhaps after years of trying. Families have expanded in so many ways, and our congregational family has expanded as well. Looking out across this full sanctuary brings a deep sense of blessing for me, particularly remembering that it was not so long ago that we couldn't gather in person and instead participated from our living rooms, singing through KN95 masks and seated at an arm's distance from even our closest family and friends. And of course, our worlds and our families have changed in ways that are much less a cause for joy. Remembering those whose last breath was taken in this Jewish calendar year, both those whose longevity was a blessing, and mercilessly those who deserved, in every system that I can call just, years and decades more with us. Those who are unable to be in this sanctuary today because they lie on a bed of pain, and those who are present here, either bearing or concealing their struggles. For some, brokenness of family or career or friendships overshadowed these months. And for others, long-standing suffering of one kind or another did not resolve and may have even worsened over this year. In the space of 1 year, some relationships that had long ago seemed irreparable were healed through the right words, the right time, or even the conscious decision that life is too short to hold on to past hurt. Since last we sat here, new friendship, even new love, has developed in some of your lives, rekindling a spark that you maybe despaired would ever burn brightly again. Some of you took risks and changed careers, embarked on long-deferred dreams, or courageously walked away from something that you'd given too much of your precious time and energy to. And of course, there were the disappointments, the dreams shattered, the barriers that were simply insurmountable, that brought about resignation, sadness, and defeat. The word in Hebrew for a year is shana. One core meaning of that word is change. The measure of a year can be found in what has changed. And what a year it has been. From a communal standpoint, as your rabbi, it is impossible to say anything without acknowledging that this has been a singularly challenging, truly terrible last year for the Jewish people worldwide, for all of us who love Israel and care for the soul of humanity, and for our Jewish community on a national and a local level. Usually you only get one joke per High Holiday sermon, but this year's been so rough that you deserve a second helping. So here we go. Do you want to know the difference between a Jewish pessimist and a Jewish optimist? A Jewish pessimist says, it couldn't get any worse, while a Jewish optimist says, sure it could. I am, by composition and nature, an optimist, and not in the Jewish sense of the word. I see glasses that are half full, and I try to pour a little more in. I endeavor at all times to see the best in others, to judge with the scales of positivity and merit, to give the benefit of the doubt, even with people or situations that stretch my patience. But the effects of this past months has me feeling depleted and worried, even scared, and yes, angry. I promise I will do my best to lift our hearts on this holy day, to bring us to a place of genuine optimism. But I have to start in this place on this day. Psalm 130 begins, Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents. Mima'akim karaticha Adonai, from out of the depths I call out to you, Adonai. Adonai, hear my prayers, listen to my cries, turn your ears and attention towards my plea for mercy. Every day since last Simchat Torah, every day since we last re-rolled the scrolls of our Torah back to the beginning, every day, each and every day, we cry out for mercy, for help, for deliverance. Deliverance for those 101 souls who continue to languish in the underground tunnels and the back bedrooms of half-destroyed apartment blocks in Gaza, where parents and children, elders and babies are held to this day on account of one thing only. They were Jews who dared to live their lives, go to work, dance at a festival, wake up in the home on the kibbutz that they built with the sweat of their brow in the land of their people, where their ancestors first spoke the words of those psalms more than 2,000 years ago. Every day, each and every day, since just after the horrible events of October 7th, we've shared the bima of Temple Isaiah with Kfir Bibas. Along with synagogues around the world, we decided in the aftermath of the attack to dedicate one chair on our bima to one hostage. We chose the youngest of them, anticipating that certainly within days, weeks, a month, soon, anticipating that certainly Kfir and his brother Ariel and their mother Shiri and their father Yarden would be returned to the loving extended family on kibbutz near Oz. That this beautiful little red-headed baby would someday possibly be able to grow beyond the horrors that he had experienced. But today, this chair remains unoccupied, a reminder at all times, in celebration and prayer, in mourning and song, of the 101 who still remain in the pits of captivity. And we are a people who never loses hope. We are a people whose continuing existence is a verification of the injunction against losing hope. And so his beautiful face remains on this other side of the bima, just as it will until all the hostages are home. Sheyavo hayom b'mehera v'yameinu b'shalom. May the day come speedily soon and with peace. I'm not an expert on Middle Eastern affairs, and I won't pretend to be one. I have no idea when or how this will come to an end, and I'm not sure that the experts can accurately tell you that either. I can report only the human response, the one that has my heart hurting for the last 361 days, the one that has me wrought up with pain for the families of the slain and the loved ones of those who are still held in hostage, crying alongside the families of the brave soldiers of the IDF, who gave the ultimate sacrifice in the effort to bring their loved ones home. And yes, in pain for the lives of countless innocent civilians, entire families that have come to an end in Gaza and now in Lebanon. And even more pained when my exhausted and calloused heart seizes with the knee-jerk reaction of denying them the pity that they so deserve. And my heart breaks for the relationships strained within all of our families and friends, with our neighbors and co-workers who do not see the world exactly as we do, and that we are living in a moment where we immediately demonize and delegitimize anyone who holds opposing views. This is not the Jewish way, and this is not the human way. I resonate most with the words of John Goldberg Polin, father of Hirsch, who shared this truth. He said, "There is a surplus of agony on all sides of the tragic conflict in the Middle East. In a competition of pain, there are no winners." So what I can think about is what we do in the here and now. How do we live our lives, put one foot in front of another, to go on through this terrible time? How do we live through the real emergence of anti-Semitism, sometimes dressed up as anti-Israel behaviors, but nearly always conflating into the irrational hatred and targeting of Jews? Anti-Semitism that is coming at us from the left and the right, and seemingly now from the middle as well. College campuses across our nation and around the world, where Jewish students are afraid to reveal their Judaism too publicly, are actively intimidated, targeted, and in the worst instances, singled out for physical attacks solely because they are visibly Jewish. There's that which has been reported, and likely so much more that's beyond what's known. I spoke about this shortly after the attacks of October 7th for nearly every rabbi and Jewish communal professional that I know in our area. Our longtime friends and allies were silent in the aftermath of the attacks. Public officials, interfaith colleagues, community partners, all the allies that we believed we had been in relationship with for years were AWOL. Some eventually did show up with concern, and I treasure them. But most skipped over that and moved quickly to the position of defending the innocent civilians of Gaza, with no recognition of the trauma suffered by the families of the 1,200 slaughtered on that day, the 250 plus taken into hostage, and the whole Jewish people worldwide thrust into our darkest moment. Since the end of the Holocaust, it was and still is beyond depressing and somehow not surprising. I felt very alone this year, and I know that many of you share this experience. The very stark reality that it could be dangerous to publicly assert one's Jewishness, dangerous to one's career or advancement, to one's relationships or friendships, dangerous even to one's physical safety, yes, even here in idyllic Howard County. And I say this as someone who chooses to wear a kippah pretty much all the time, and who's thought very seriously about that over recent months. Last year, we printed about 1,000 I Love Temple Isaiah car magnets. It makes me so happy when I'm driving on the roads of our community and I see them on a car in front of me. And I recognize and I sympathize with the fact that putting this on your car somehow is a decision that's harder than it should be in 2024. It has been suggested that this is specifically the time to stand up proudly and publicly as a Jew. Bret Stephens, the journalist and thought leader, was in conversation with my extraordinary colleague and friend, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl of Central Synagogue. He remarked that in the time since the attacks of October 7th, he's suddenly started doing things that he hadn't done with any regularity before. He was not a particularly observant Jew before that terrible day, but suddenly he and his family are prioritizing lighting Shabbat candles every Friday night. He posits that this is the moment for us all to become, in his words, 10% Jewier. Some of you laugh because you get the origin of the phrase is actually from the book and podcast and app by former TV news anchor Dan Harris, who wrote about 10 years ago, 10% Happier. But in hearing this idea, I was reminded of some of the most positive things that I've seen over this past year. Yes, it has been a terrible and depressing year, a year of fear and anger and dashed hopes, a year of feeling alone and abandoned in this world, and yet I have seen many of you become energized around following the news of the Jews, right? Paying attention to things like the sound of Hatikva, belted out by the Israeli Paralympic swimming gold medalist Ami Dadun, who said after coming down from the podium, "All I want in this moment is to represent the people of Israel and to give them hope." Just over 2 weeks ago, the world watched as an Emmy was awarded to Alex Edelman for outstanding writing on a variety TV show for his comedy special, Just for Us. A comedy special that is exclusively about anti-Semitism. I know it doesn't really sound like it's great fodder for a comedy special material, but if you haven't seen Just for Us, stream it. I promise you. Make sure you do. It will be worth it. There are countless stories of valor about ordinary people who risked everything on October 7th to charge headfirst, repeatedly into the most dangerous of situations to save fellow human beings regardless of who they were. I was fortunate enough to travel in January to Israel to meet with some of these true everyday heroes, and I will never forget those encounters. I share only one of them today. I met with Shira and Moshe Shapira, whose eldest son, Aner, was Hirsch Goldberg Poland's best friend from childhood until October 7th. The two of them took on the role of calming and protecting the 24 people crammed into the Pikudit, the roadside mini shelter. It was Aner who stood at the entrance of the shelter armed with a broken bottle, and the bravery that was the core of his soul. When Hamas arrived, it was he who caught and threw back at Hamas, one after another grenade tossed into the tiny shelter, one after another, in total 7 grenades that he threw back at Hamas, until ultimately the 8th grenade claimed his life. His father Moshe recounted with incredible strength the parallelisms between his own grandfather, Chaim Moshe Shapira, a signatory to Israel's Declaration of Independence, and his son Aner. Chaim Moshe dedicated his life to service in the Knesset as a member almost uninterrupted from 1948 until his death in 1970. He was wounded in a grenade attack on the Knesset in the late 1950s. Chaim Moshe and Aner were born on the same day on the Hebrew calendar year. Aner's father told us, "My grandfather signed the Declaration of the State of Israel with a pen. My son signed it with his blood." You can look a lot closer to home and be inspired by the Jewish pride and active engagement that's come as a direct result of the events of this terrible year. This past November, a handful of Temple Isaiah High School students came to me saying that they desperately needed a place to feel Jewish and proud, to feel safe and affirmed with their peers, something that was already becoming a real issue here in our high schools at that point. Together with Rabbi Weiss and myself, this small group conceived of and then planned in its entirety an evening of Hoko Jewish pride on the 4th night of Hanukkah, held here at Temple Isaiah, but bringing together the broad coalition of synagogues, summer camps, BBYO, our federation, to host over 200 teens to dance, celebrate, and light the menorah together. Our students spoke passionately about the need to feel Jewish pride, to stand together with their brothers and sisters in Israel, to unite in safe spaces, as well as organizing within their high schools, Jewish student unions and clubs for education, support, and sharing their faith and their culture with peers. It may seem a little frivolous, but the image of the TI dance floor, packed with Howard County teens doing the coordinated line dances from Camps Erie and Louise and Capital Camps to the sounds of modern Israeli techno music, fills me with joy. It's one of the most joyful moments of this year for me. Plans are underway for a follow-up event this year. You know, Jewish student unions existed before October 7th in a handful of Montgomery and Howard County high schools. Through the newly formed Jewish Parents Coalition, again, largely led by members of Temple Isaiah, they now exist and are beginning to flourish in nearly all of our high schools. The JPC has also identified multiple parent representatives in nearly every elementary, middle, and high school throughout the county. These positions, this organization, did not exist 1 year ago. Working in collaboration with the Jewish Federation of Howard County, the JPC has deeply engaged with the school system, county offices, and others to make sure that we're present at the table, and importantly, to make sure that it is clear that the Jewish community will not simply stand by when injustice and discrimination are directed at us, and that we genuinely wish to be in relationship with others. I've spent more time and energy over this past year engaged in public and private discussions on this topic than ever before. It has been, frankly, exhausting and important work. Bret Stephens was asked what the Jewish response to anti-Semites ought to be. Initially, his answer was that we don't need to respond. This is their problem. Explaining, he posits, that every society and culture where groups of anti-Semites have arisen over history have eventually assured their own destruction or irrelevance. Every empire, government, hate group that has arisen over the last 2+ millennia has ultimately been confined rightly to the trash bin of history. Instead, he proposes, quote, the correct response to anti-Semitism is Jewish pride. And I would say to all of you in this room, be 10% Jewier in whatever way you want, not only for yourselves, but for your kids or grandchildren, for all our children. Having had the cosmic fortune to be born into this extraordinary cultural, religious, psychological inheritance, that this is a great fortune in my life, and it is important for me to pass on to my kids in some meaningful way. It's a sense of obligation towards the past. So I want to take up this challenge and present it to you here today, to members of Temple Isaiah, that one response to the terrible year that we've all lived through, I'm asking you to be 10% Jewier this year, to consciously choose to do more Jewish acts, and they can be any kind you'd like. Would I love to see a 10% surge in attendance in the sanctuary for regular Shabbat services? Sure. But that's far from the only thing that I think could be a meaningful and positive way that you could confront the current moment. Read a Jewish book. This year, TI has joined as a formal partner with the Jewish Book Council, and a subgroup of the Adult Ed Committee has planned author visits, group reads, and various events for demographic groups all across the congregation. We are still, as we said in our readings, the people of the book. And let me tell you something, those books are pretty fabulous and amazing. Read a good Jewish book this year, or more. Get engaged with our social action and social justice work. Over the last few months, we've had postcarding parties across the congregation. I was so grateful to participate in 2 events with our friends and allies from First Baptist Church of Guilford, both here in our social hall and in their fellowship hall. We did this as a mitzvah. There are no shortage of ways to help in the varied social action and social justice efforts. Temple Isaiah's weekly Torah study group has grown exponentially over the last year, so much so that we just keep adding tables. Wake up a little earlier on a Saturday morning. Go a little out of your comfort zone. Come and study the Torah portion with friends and fellow members of your congregation. I promise you, we're going to welcome you with open arms. We're not that scary. Wear a Jewish symbol outside. The proliferation of the Israeli dog tag style necklace that's been popularized over the last year, the one that reads, "My heart is held captive in Gaza," is a beautiful example of this. If you've worn one, you know the look of recognition that you get from those who get it. And if you've seen someone wearing one, you've noticed and perhaps asked, So go ahead, wear something recognizably Jewish and invite others to ask you about it. Do so without defensiveness or reaction. Just share that you are proudly Jewish. By the way, a Temple Isaiah matzo ball t-shirt totally does it. I wear it to the pool all the time. People ask me, what's the matzo ball 5K? Read a daily Jewish news source. There are so many available for free online. Give tzedakah to Jewish causes. I assure you that if you have a passion that you'd like to express philanthropically, I can direct you towards a Jewish way to connect that. And when you give to non-Jewish causes, that's a mitzvah too. Talk to your neighbors, especially your non-Jewish neighbors, about what makes you proud to be Jewish. Be inquisitive. Ask them about their cultures and faiths. Look for places of similarity and appreciate the places of different. Here's a big ask. Come with me to Israel this June. I had initially planned to visit Israel with members of the synagogue in December, but that trip was not to be. And I recognize that this might not be the easiest time to consider putting down a deposit on a trip to Israel. But I've just received the updated itinerary for a Temple Isaiah trip that will go on June 7th. It will be a solidarity mission, yes, and we will visit some of the areas and individuals impacted on October 7th and over the last year. But it will also be a trip to experience and take in the vibrant and joyful place that Israel continues to be every single day. We'll eat great food, we'll see ancient and modern wonders, and of course we'll do a little shopping, and we will be in Israel. Our Israeli family is hurting. This is the time to go and be with them. Come along with me. You won't regret it. Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, had a way with a turn of the phrase. He was quoted as saying, "I am much more concerned with what Jews do than what anti-Semites say." Do something proudly, publicly Jewish. And then do a little more. It will not solve the problems of the world that we're living in, but I can promise you that it will make you feel better. And it just might bring a little bit more light to our world of darkness. 10%. More. You choose. It is a hard time to confront right now, but I can tell you today that I hold on to hope that the coming year, that 5785, will be a better year for all of us. I am bound eternally to this people whose very existence bears witness to the reality of hope and looks towards a better future. I wish you, from me and my family, to you and yours, a Shana Tova U'Mituka, that 5785 be a good, a better, a sweeter, and more peaceful and healthier new year for us all.
Given over to trouble or captivity, whether they are on oceans or dry land. May the Holy One have mercy on them and bring them from distress to wide open places, and from darkness to light, and from confinement to deliverance, speedily in our days and in this time.
Hamakom Yerachem, Yerachem Aleichem, Yetzihem Mitzrayim, Yirachem Umayafilahora, Mishiyamu Leula Hashta Bagala, Ubizman
Amen. It is my pleasure